Hello, this is Donna and thank you so much for joining me on my very first video. It's lovely to have you here. I have lots of cards to share with you today, all centered around some stenciled backgrounds that I created quite a while back now. Now, I took lots of footage from a few different crafting sessions over a good couple of weeks. Unfortunately, after spending a significant amount of time editing, I lost quite a large chunk of that footage. I've done my best to piece it back together. However, this means that in some places I'm filming in retrospect and I'm having to show you parts of a finished card rather than the actual making. I've tried to keep the flow of the video as clear as possible, and I hope you understand it isn't the best position to be in for my first video, but I had already invested so much time into it that I didn't want to waste. Hopefully you still find this video worthwhile and you're still able to take something from it. I just wanted to let you know about that. Okay, so back to the video. I start by showing you the backgrounds, the stencil and the different inks I used. Then I share a standalone card, a set of cards which are the same but different, then some shaped cards. I have a few bonus cards thrown in there for good luck too. I was able to mix and match many products making these cards, as well as lots of different companies. If you don't have exactly what I'm using, you will probably have something very similar that you already own. So I would encourage you to have a good rummage through your stash and see what you already have. I will be sure to add timestamps in the description box, and hopefully the variety of cards and supplies used means there's something for everyone. Right, let's get started with the backgrounds. So a few weeks back now, I created a bunch of backgrounds using a stencil by Creative Expressions. I will show you the stencil in a second. Here are examples of all of those different backgrounds that I made. I switched up the colours. I used pigment inks, dye inks, metallic inks. I used metallic paste, a whole bunch of different mediums to get different looks. And as you can see, I created lots and lots of different backgrounds. Now, I did use a new product that I had never used before. I also think it's new to the company also. This product is from Altenew and I will show you in more detail in a little while. But this card here is one of the cards where I used that product, and it's their new shimmer pastes. And I couldn't believe how gorgeous the results were. But first, let's have a look at the stencil I used. This stencil is by Creative Expressions. It's the Daisies Mini Triple Layering Stencil. The size of this stencil is around 3 by 4¼ There are 3 stencils in the set. So you have the middle of the flower there on the left, the flower petals, which I am showing there in the middle, and the leaves, which are on the right. Now, all of these stencils can be used. I'm showing you here, I have used all 3 of those stencils on that green and gold background. However, on this blue background, I skipped the leaves, and I like how you can get 2 different looks from this one stencil. The green one there on the right is a little bit busier. The one on the left in the blues isn't quite as busy, it's a little bit softer. And of course, the inks and the mediums that you choose to use help to switch up the look of the finished background also. Now, I use this cardstock here, which is the A4 White Smooth Premium Collection cardstock from Craft UK. It's a 300 GSM. It's a lovely cardstock. It's one of my favourite. This is what I mainly used for creating my backgrounds. So as you can see, I am positioning the first stencil there on the card. I have a 4x4 grip mat from Waffle Flower holding that card in place. And I'm choosing to use some Altenew Fresh Dye inks. I absolutely love these inks and I love that they come in these colour families. I'm also going to be using some small blending brushes. I also purchased some larger blending brushes as well from Craft Stash. I've never used them before, but I did want to give them a go to see how well they perform. I think this particular style of brush will work really well in covering the first layer of this stencil, with having more surface area to cover. I also really like that they're flat and that they have a little holder for you to put the brush into them, which just makes storage really easy as well. There's no ink transfer onto shelves and things like that. So I'm taking the very lightest shade here, which is Dewdrops, and I'm going in, stenciling that first layer with that light colour. And you can see this brush works really well in quickly covering that stencil. I'm also pointing out there the registration mark. And I usually just make sure to go over with a little bit of ink, and then that will help me to line up the second stencil when I come to use it. You can also as well use a pencil or a pen just to pop a little circle there. I'm lining up the leaves using that registration mark to get everything in place. And I'm using Teal Cave this time. This is the second darkest colour. And I've switched to a smaller brush to help me get into all those nooks and crannies of those leaves. So then once these leaves are finished, I will just have the centres to do. Here's something like I'm aiming for. This is a background I have done previously. And to create the centres, I use the Altenew Shimmer Relief Paste. This is absolutely beautiful. I have here the pearl and the rose gold. I haven't used any of the pearl yet. I've only used the rose gold in the other backgrounds that I've done. So today I am going to give the pearl a try. This is what the rose gold looks like. It's a very unique formula that I've never seen before. It's not overly thick, but it's also not overly runny. It's very unusual. I can't explain it any other way really. And it's just got this gorgeous shimmer to it. You can see it's really easy to go on, and any excess can just be scraped back and put into the pot. And when you pull it off, you get this gorgeous dimension and shine. It's just beautiful. And once it's dry, it's dry. Nothing comes off, no shimmer comes off. It's gorgeous. I thought it would be useful to next show you some of the different inks I used and some of the different looks that those inks create. So for many of my cards, I used the Lisa Horton Metallic Pigment ink. You can see here the silver shine on the left, the copper pot in the middle, and on the right is the solid gold. These are beautiful metallic inks. And here I have some examples of backgrounds where I've used them. I use them mainly for the flower centres. So these ones on the left here, you can see the silver. And then on the right hand side, we have some examples of where I've used the gold. The copper I did use on a few of them, but I used the copper for the flower petals. So I thought it would be handy to show you how these inks look on white and black. So there we have the gold on the left, the silver on the right, and the copper up there at the top. And I also stamped a few leaves with each of these colours as well, so that you can see a comparison. I did on one of the backgrounds also use an interference ink by Lisa Horton. Now, if you're not familiar with interference inks, they're a relatively new product. And the best way I can think to describe them is a colour shifting ink. So the one I used is the Royal Truffle Shimmer. And you can see on the left hand side of the lid, there's that brownie colour. And on the right hand side, there's the blue colour. Now that indicates the colour that will show up predominantly on either white or black. The white is on the left hand side and the black is on the right hand side. So on my white background here, as you're looking at it, we can see that brown truffle colour. But you can see as we tilted it, we do see a little bit of that blue coming through. However, if I go onto the black card, you can distinctly see that gorgeous blue colour. They're like magic inks. It's incredible how they work. And it was just a different option that I decided to use to get a different look on the background. Now, a third ink that I used on the backgrounds is white pigment ink. These are some examples here, and I love the soft effect that the white pigment ink gave. It took on a little bit of that colour from the dye ink underneath. These examples are all the Altenew fresh dye ink straight to paper, and it just gives a gorgeous soft look. Okay, so let's get on to creating some cards, and I'm going to start with our standalone card, and it uses quite a few elements I received in the Spellbinders Advent Calendar at the end of 2024. I happened to have a December birthday and I was given it as a gift. And in that advent calendar, there was this gorgeous bumblebee die, also the hello banner that you can see there on the right, and the swirly die that you can see there coming out of the bumblebee's stinger. I'm starting here by cutting a circle out from one of the patterned papers. I've gone for this yellow and orange one. I thought it worked well with the bumblebee. I'm also cutting an additional white scalloped layer to go underneath it, and also this larger flower die as well to go underneath that. So I get a lovely layered look and some different texture on the front of the card. And in terms of the colour for the bumblebee, I couldn't find a yellow that I wanted to use that I thought would go well. So I went straight to paper with the Dewdrops Memento fade resistant dye ink in Dandelion. Once it was dry, I cut my bumblebee's body from that. His stripes and his arms and his little ears there, I cut from the Altenew Jet Black Crafty Necessities cardstock. For his wings, I actually used tracing paper. It looks like vellum, but I don't have vellum, and tracing paper is a relatively inexpensive alternative to vellum and works really well. So I wanted some detail on the back of this card, and I decided to use an embossing folder to do that. This is the Spellbinders embossing folder in hand-drawn scallops, and I love the fun detail it gives to this background. I thought it went really well with the little bumblebee. And I chose a sentiment from this clearly besotted stamp set to stamp inside the card. Okay, so let's put our card together. I cut this panel down to just smaller than the card base to give a small border. I then laid up the larger scallop die cut and then the smaller one, and then finally the circle on top of that. I then decided to add an action wobbler onto the back of our bumblebee. I placed the hello banner so it sits just in the curve of that circle, and I like how it falls just under his wing. And then finally I attached our gold swirl and just held it in place there with some tweezers. As a finishing touch, I went in with a Spectrum Noir sparkle pen on his ears and on his stinger, and that was the card finished. I love the playful feel of this card. I think the scallops in the background just give that extra sense of playfulness and fun, and I was really pleased with how this one turned out. Okay, so I've next got a whole bunch of cards to show you. I think I made 8 in total. They are very similar, but all a little bit different just by switching up some of the elements on each of the cards. So I have used different embossing folders, different colours for the wings, and the backgrounds have obviously been created using different colours and different inks also. So off screen, I cut a load of white butterflies, the shadow layer and the top layer. They are an older set from Sizzix and Tim Holtz. Next, I chopped down about 8 of these backgrounds, different colours, and then I created a border around some of them with the metallic inks. This is an extra step which isn't entirely necessary, but I do feel it helps to just complete the panel. Just adds that little bit of extra shine and detail when you tilt it into the light. I also cut and prepped some panels of craft foam. These are just smaller than my patterned panels, and they measure around 2.5 by 3.25. I cut 8 of those and I stick them to the back of each of the panels. This helped to give them some supports and also to give them a little bit of lift up from the page. Next, I stuck 2 of those white shadow layer die cuts together. Off screen, I also cut panels at 4.25 by 5.5. Here is the scalloped one that I used in the bumblebee card. This one here is another one by Spellbinders. It's called Columns. It's one of my favourite ones. I use this one a lot. So once all those panels have been stuck to the front, I then stuck down the patterned paper panels with the craft foam behind. I centred those on each of the cards, and I wanted my butterflies to look slightly different. So on this one here, I have cut from gold, and what I do is layer the gold with a second white die cut so that the gold shines through, but the white one on the top will give some movement and definition to the butterfly. And this was really easy to lie down because I used the pattern in the gold die cut behind to help me line everything up. So you will see I go about each butterfly in a different way. By doing it this way, I was able to create lots of different cards fairly quickly, just by switching up one or two things and giving each card a different look. This next butterfly, I decided to add a silver body. I also used my Spectrum Noir sparkle pen on that top white die cut to add some extra sparkle and detail to that. And then I popped that butterfly together and added it to the card. And on this next example, I use just the wings of this butterfly rather than letting them go to waste. So I stick those wings either side and add the white die cuts over the top with the glue just in the middle. So I repeated this for all 8 of the butterflies. Some have metallic wings, some have metallic bodies, some have sparkle pen, some don't. But it was a really quick way of mixing up the look of these cards. So for a sentiment for these cards, I went through my stamps and I found some smaller sentiments from some of my Heidi swap stamps. I thought a very small sentiment in the centre of each butterfly would work really well on these cards. I used my Memento Tuxedo black ink again to stamp multiples of these onto white card. I also took advantage of some scraps and used an acrylic block to stamp some sentiments as well. And to cut those out, I used the smallest rectangle from the Creative Craft Products Nestables. So I ran each sentiment through and then I just chopped off the length on each side. And then I just popped one of each onto the card. So here you can see all 8 of my final cards with those really tiny sentiments in the middle. And I just added a few gems on each of those cards as well. For these next pair of cards, I combined the backgrounds with a set of layering dies and other die cut elements. These cards have a really elegant feel to them, and I've easily been able to switch up the look by changing the orientation, making one landscape, the other portrait, and by choosing different focal points for the front. The dies are from Honeybee Stamps and they are the Spring Vine layering frames. I chose not to use all of the dies today. Instead, I mixed and matched a few to suit my needs and the look that I was going for on the card. Being able to get lots of different looks and uses is something I really appreciate. So I cut my pieces from a white cardstock and then I cut the main frame again from the Concord and 9th eucalyptus cardstock so that I could inlay those leaves there in the corner. I had used the matching eucalyptus ink on the background I was planning to use and thought doing this would tie the background and the frame together nicely. For my focal point, I chose this large smile sentiment die from Unico. And to tie that in with the stenciled background, I used the same green as the flower centres. The green I used was the Altenew Fresh Dye ink in Forest Fern, going straight to paper and die cutting from that once it was dry. I cut 2 additional layers and glued all 3 together, which I then stuck to the shadow layer. I used my tracing paper trick again here as an alternative to using vellum. To give the sentiment lift from the background, I stuck a 4th sentiment to the back of the shadow layer before sticking it down onto the card. To finish the card, I added 2 more die cuts to the inside, and then this card was finished. It came together pretty quickly, apart from the time I took to do the inlay. But for an even quicker card, the inlay could definitely be skipped, or you could do a quicker technique, which I'm about to do in my next card. So for this second card, I switched to a vertical orientation, but I kept all of my layering elements the same as in my first example. This took a lot of guesswork and planning out of the equation, and I was able to put that layered background together really quickly. This time, instead of inlaying coloured leaves, I cut a piece of coloured paper, the same used on the stenciled piece that I was planning to use, and cut a piece to fit behind. I'm taking the die here and drawing around it, and I will cut just inside those lines. This will ensure that none of the paper shows behind the scallops when I turn it over. So once all my parts were cut, it was time for a focal point, and I decided to use the larger bird from the Sizzix and Tim Holtz set. Off screen, I cut both layers of the bird plus the wing from white cardstock, and I inked the wing in the same copper pot metallic ink that I had used on the stencil flowers. To colour the bird, I used a pro marker in the shade Bluebell, and I cut an additional bottom layer of the bird from navy cardstock for the head and the feet. Once everything was ready, I glued everything down and I added foam tape to the back of the bird. I'm using the alternate 1/2 inch width and 1/8 of a width thickness. I decided to leave a sentiment off for the time being, but I did finish the card in the same way as the first one by adding those layering die cuts on the inside. I also have a bonus card here to show you, which I created from the negative of the stenciled background. I love that large sentiment in the middle with the simple white frame around the outside, and this design is definitely one that I would like to do more of in the future. So on all of the examples we've looked at so far, I've used a traditional rectangle card base. However, because I was trying to stretch my creativity, I wanted to step the cards up a little bit. I did this by changing the size, shape and style of the cards, and we'll have a look at some of those examples next. The first shape card I made features our cute little bumblebee again. I had made a second one because I liked him so much, and I have created a small shaped card base for him to sit on. To do this, I used the Spellbinder's Essential Floral Reflection cutting dies, taking the size that would best fit onto my stencil background. Remember, the stencils are a smaller size, so this is going to make a smaller shaped card base also. I cut 3 times, twice from white cardstock and once from my background. On one of those white pieces, I stuck the patterned paper. However, on the other, the one that will form the back of the card, I made a score mark towards the top of the die cut. This doesn't have to be a particular size, you just need enough space to create a flap to add glue onto. To assemble the card base, I put liquid glue above the score line only and attach the front. Now, there are 2 options for this card. You can use the card horizontally and it stands up nicely. However, because of the point at the bottom, the card falls back to that horizontal position. So this is easily fixed by trimming off a little bit from the bottom, and I find the easiest way to do this is to open the card and trim one side first, then close the card to line up the other side. Once the bottom of that base is flat, you can see it stands up nicely. I added the same alternate foam tape to the back of the bumblebee and added him to the card. I think he looks so sweet set there, and just for reference, here is the card in relation to my hand. For those of you who like measurements, this is around 3 1/4 by 2.5 inches. It's a really lovely different size and I really like it. To finish the card, I added a few sequins. These are the Spellbinder's Colour Essential Sequins in Teal Opalescence, and these were included in the advent calendar also, as well as the hello stamp that I'm stamping there on the inside. The next card I made was a shaker card using those same Spellbinder's cutting dies. This one is slightly bigger and uses a variety of the dies from that set. I first cut my stenciled background for one of the dies. Next, I used 2 dies together to create a frame. Because I was going to be cutting these multiple times, I taped them together and then applied anti-static powder to any exposed sticky part. This will prevent the dies from getting stuck onto the card and makes for quicker die cutting when you're trying to get a lot done all in one go. Once my frames were cut, I think I cut around 8 to 10 of these out. I began stacking them on top of each other. I ended up stacking around 5 or 6 to make the base of our shaker because I wanted this to be nice and strong. And you'll notice that the inside of the frame is the same size as my cut background. I did this by using the same size die plus the next size up to make the frame. This means that I will easily be able to pop the background back into that space once the shaker base is constructed. For the back of the shaker frame, I used that same larger die on its own this time and cut from white cardstock. I stick the layered frames on top, then add glue to the inside before adding my stencil background. And you can see it pops really easily back into that frame. For a sentiment, I'm using this Collect Beautiful Moments from a Heidi Swapp stamp set, and I decided to stamp this directly onto the shaker window. You can just about see the acetate there on the bottom right of my stamp platform. I'm using the Lawn Fawn heat resistant acetate, and I stamp onto that with Versamark ink. I did use my anti-static powder again on that acetate, although I don't have footage of that here, then sprinkled on white embossing powder and heated that up. I made the base of the card exactly the same as in the previous example, starting with 2 blank shapes, scoring one at the top to make a tab and attaching them together with liquid glue just above that score line. I added silver metallic ink to what will be my very top frame. The acetate will be sandwiched between this and the stacked frames, then added clear embossing powder over the top. Once that was heated, I repeated the process, this time using Versamark ink instead of the silver ink. And this helps to create a smoother look to the embossing powder and gives it a lot of dimension and shine. To assemble the card, I took a small bit off the bottom like I did in the previous card, then cut and embossed a matte layer using the Honeybee Stamps Daisy Field embossing folder. I also cut the same size layer as the shaker from a Tonic Studios adhesive sheet and cut it down slightly so that it stuck nicely onto the back of the shaker elements. This was to help it make a good connection to that embossed layer that it was going to be sitting onto. Now, unfortunately, the footage of me putting the shaker together was some of what I lost, so my apologies for that. Essentially, what I did after sticking all of those frames together and adding my patterned piece to the middle is I stuck the embossed acetate on top of those frames. That trapped the paper plus a handful of silver sequins inside, and then I added the silver frame on top to complete the shaker. I really like the unusual shape of this card and I hope to make more like this in the future. I finally have a few more bonus cards here to share with you. On all of these I kept the full stenciled panel, and for these examples I used the Crafter's Companion Calais cover die. For the larger one I cut it twice and created a shape card in the same way with the tab at the top. I completed it with the Honeybee Stamps Dogwood die and a sentiment from the Altenew Versatile Greetings die set. I then added Spellbinder's Woodland Tales gems to the centre of the flowers. The next two were simply folded in half with a sentiment in the middle. I love the shine and texture on these panels and didn't want to cover too much of it up, so I kept things nice and simple. I did add some shimmer pen and glossy accents to that hug sentiment that you can see there in the middle. And that's it. That's all the cards I have for you today. Thank you for watching, especially if you made it right here to the very end. Be sure to subscribe to see more videos, and I would love for you to say hello down in the comments. Enjoy the rest of your day or evening, and I will see you soon.